I'm Christy and welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm here with a beginner's guide to historical romances. So if you didn't know, I absolutely love historical romances so much. They are my favorite subgenre of romances to read. I love them to pieces. So I have gotten asked a few times like where to start. I want to pick up historical romances, like which books do you recommend? And it's always really hard to recommend books because I feel like it's really dependent on the type of books or romances that they already read. And so usually I'll kind of get a gist of that, of like what tropes, what type of like, are you into dark romances? Are you not? So kind of like their comfort level, maybe like content warnings, all of those type of things I kind of try to figure out first before I recommend books. But I did want to also do this kind of like a basic beginner's guide to historical romances as well, with just some of like my favorite tropes and where I would recommend people starting with historical romances, picking up different series, authors, kind of all of those things. So while this video is geared more towards people who want to kind of dip their toes and get into historical romances, obviously this is for anybody. Like if you also read historical romances and just want some more recs or some of my favorites or some trope recommendations, kind of all of those things are going to be in this video as well, but it's definitely geared towards more people getting into historical romances. So I did want to keep this guide kind of simple, so I started off with 8 series that I'd recommend people starting with, and these are all from authors that I absolutely love. These are all series that I have read. Some of them I've reread. I love these books to pieces and would recommend these honestly to anybody to pick up who is looking to get into historical romances. So we'll get into those first, and then after that I have broken it up into 8 different tropes, and I have 4 book recommendations for each category. So like if you were coming like from contemporary romances and you know you like fake dating or you like second chance or you like dark romance, then I kind of point you in directions of where I feel like would be a good start for you into historical romances. So basically that's the introduction to this video. I'm going to try to keep it kind of simple and just straightforward, but you know I love historical romances and I love to gush about them, so I might get a little long-winded, so just bear with me. Also, if you want even more historical romance recommendations, I have an entire playlist on my channel of just like all the historical romance, different tropes, different recommendation videos I've done over the years, which I will link that playlist in the description of this video. And if you want even more historical romance content from me, then you can go to my Goodreads. It's always linked in the description of my videos as well. I have just under 600 historical romances that I have read and loved and reviewed on my Goodreads, so definitely check that out as well. All right, so with all of that out of the way, let's get into the 8 different series that I recommend starting with if you're new to historical romances. First up is by tried and true, I love her so much, Lisa Kleypas's Wallflowers series, and this is the first book, so this is Secrets of a Summer Night. I love showing off the covers and the gorgeous step back moments of my historical romance collection. I love Lisa Kleypas historicals so much. This is actually one of my first historical romance series that I started with years ago, and I've reread the series multiple times. It's so good. I'm currently co-hosting a read-along for the series because I love it just to pieces and talking about it. This series basically follows 4 different wallflowers, which is basically for women who are kind of on the outskirts of society. They kind of hug the ballroom walls. They haven't gotten married yet, and they decide to make a pact and work together to find husbands. And so each heroine has her own book in the series, and this is the first book, and it is just so good. Highly recommend. So good. Lisa Kleypas, like her historical romances hit so well, which I do have a whole author's guide to Lisa Kleypas. So if you've read this series and you're like, I want more Lisa Kleypas recs, I talk about every single one in my Lisa Kleypas guide. I will link that in the description of the video as well. So yeah, the Wallflower series by Lisa Kleypas, highly recommend starting with this series. Another one who's tried and true, and I know that so many people recommend starting with her, is Tessa Dare, and this is the Duchess Steele. So here is the cover for this one, and then we have the step back moment as well. I love Tessa Dare's historical romances. I've read them all and have so much fun with them. Hers are basically more of like rom-com or like witty levels of humor that are brought to the historical romances, which I feel like help make it feel kind of modern and light, just like a good intro to historical romances. And this book in particular, we have the hero and the heroine, and the heroine is a seamstress who has made this wedding dress for who the hero was supposed to get married to. And so that wedding ended up getting canceled, and the heroine is left with this wedding dress that she created for months and the bill. And she's like, I'm still gonna get paid for my work, right? So she shows up at the hero's house in the wedding dress and is like, hey, I want to get paid for this gorgeous dress that I made, even though you're not getting married anymore. And so when she shows up in a wedding dress, the hero is like, this is perfect. I need a wife and I need to have a child, and I'm back from the war and I'm grumpy, and like, you'll do, like, let's get married. And so he kind of proposes a marriage of convenience with her, and it kind of goes from there. It's so much fun. This whole series follows them and their friends, and it's just so good. I love them so much. There are 3 books in the series currently. Next up, we have Joanna Shupe. This is The Rogue of Fifth Avenue, and this This is the first book in her Uptown Girls series. Highly recommend Joanna Shupe. I've read all of her historical romances as well. I stand by her historicals. They're so good, and they read kind of more modern as well, and I just love her romances because she always has like some kind of like alpha broodiness to her heroes as well, which Joanna Shupe actually has a pen name for contemporary romances as well. So if you've read Mila Finelli, those kind of like darker mafia romances, that is the same author. Joanna Shupe and Mila Finelli are the same person. So the Uptown Girls is a series of 3 books, and they follow the Green sisters. So this series and most of Joanna Shupe's historical romances take place in Gilded Age New York. So basically New York City, turn of the century, 1890s kind of time frame is what we're working with. And there's very much this like whole uptown society kind of vibe. And so the sisters in this series are all part of a kind of wealthy society families in New York. And it's very much like opposites attract of who they end up getting paired with in each of their books. And it's so good. And I love the heroines in here. They're very much like progressive and just kind of like taking on society things that are happening and injustices and all of that in the city. And this one is so good. The hero in here is like a wealthy power broker for New York society. So he works with the heroine's father. And basically he's supposed to keep the heroine in line. She kind of likes to live life dangerously and gets herself into a little bit of trouble. And so he's a lawyer who's supposed to kind of keep her on track, and it's their story, and it's so good. Highly recommend the whole series. All of them are like 5 stars for me. I love this series so much. Another series that I love is The Wild Winchesters by Erica Ridley. This is the first book in the series, so this is the Duke heist. This whole series is very found family. Basically, we follow these siblings who have all been raised together. They were adopted by this society man, and he raised them all, and now they're all adults, and they work together to kind of solve mysteries and crimes and kind of help those less fortunate. And so it is so much fun. Tons of like hijinks and adventures in here. Each sibling has gotten a book in the series, and they're just so much fun. We have like map makers, and they wear disguises, and they kind of like just infiltrate places and try to solve crimes. They just do all the things. I love book 1 and book 2, especially in the series, so much. Just such a strong series, and especially if you love like found family, highly recommend checking out The Wild Winchesters by Erica Ridley. Next up is Wicked and the Wallflower by Sarah MacLean, and this is the first book in her Bare Knuckle Bastards series, and I love this series to pieces, and it's just such a good series. Sarah MacLean is such a great historical romance author. I love most of her like older books in particular, but the series I do really love it as well, which here is this gorgeous pink moment and then the pink step back as well. And here the heroine is Felicity Faircloth and the hero is Devil, which I just love their names so much. So basically in this one, the hero is the bastard son of a duke, and he's also kind of like the king of the London underground and kind of knows a lot of like secrets going on, and he's set on this kind of like revenge plan. And so basically he decides he's going to come and help the heroine, who is a bit of a wallflower, and he says he wants to offer his help in helping her land a husband. So basically he wants to kind of use her, turn her into this like temptress, set a trap, and kind of like find one of his enemies. It's so good. I love these two together so much. It's just such a good book. I might have to reread it because I love it so much. Next up is Beverly Jenkins' Destiny series. So this first book in the series is Destiny's Embrace, and I love this whole series to pieces. This is actually the series that I started with when I read Beverly Jenkins. I love all of the books in the series. We follow this family of brothers, and each of them gets their romance, and so there are 3 books in the series. It's so good. I love Beverly Jenkins' historical romances so much. I've read them all. I have a whole guide to her books as well on my channel, which I'll link in the description of the video, and they're just so good. They take place in America. This one in particular is in California, and we follow the heroine who has moved to California from Philadelphia. She's very headstrong, and she has applied to be a housekeeper at the hero's family's kind of ranch. So there's a lot of like forced proximity and them working together, and it's just so good. If you love strong heroines, Beverly Jenkins is definitely the author for you. Her heroines are all so strong and sassy, and I just love them to pieces. She also has very much like those kind of cozy slice of life moments in her books as well, and very much like a community, and they just pack in so much history. They're so good. I love her books so much. Highly recommend the Destiny series. Another series that I highly recommend is the Ruthless Rivals series by Kate Bateman. This is the first book of the series, and this is a reckless match. So this book is a lot of fun. It takes place in Wales, and basically we have these 2 feuding families. Their families have been at odds and feuding for literally generations, and basically in the past the king kind of set this thing where the 2 families have to make amends because their lands border one another, and they share this kind of like, I think, water supply as well, and so they have to get along. And so there's this whole like bargain and deal situation where a member from each family has to come and meet to kind of like keep the peace for generations. This has been happening, and so now it is the hero and the heroine's turn, and they're kind of like rivals and enemies. And so it is just so much fun. If you love like sass and banter and just like a really fun time, highly recommend this series. It's just so good. It's kind of giving like Hatfield and McCoy's kind of vibes of like feuding families. Just highly recommend. Really love this. Kate Bateman has some great historical romances. Next up is my favorite historical romance author, which is Lorraine Heath, and this is In Bed with the Devil. This is the start of her Scoundrels of St. James series, and there are 5 books in the series, and they're all so stinking good. I love the series so much. I've reread it multiple times. The series is just everything, and I love them. They're kind of more on the darker side. Basically, they follow these 5 friends who all kind of grew up on the streets together, popular, and basically it's kind of like a take on Oliver Twist as far as them like being children and kind of like swindling people out of money, tricking people on the streets, kind of doing whatever it took to survive. And so now they've all kind of grown up and you kind of see their stories from there. So there's a lot of like class difference romances, and it is just so good. Highly recommend. I would say they're kind of more on the darker side of things with some of the elements of their characters' past, but just so good. I love this series. 2 pieces. Lorraine Heath always hits for me. I have a guide for her on my channel as well. So just highly recommend. This is In Bed with the Devil by Lorraine Heath. And this is such a great place to start with her books. I feel like if you want to get into her books, highly recommend starting with the series. All right, so those are the 8 series that I recommend getting into if you want to get into historical romances, or if you just want to get into any of those authors. Those are just kind of a good place to start with them. And I know I'm keeping it kind of brief for each of these series and each of these books, but if you ever do want more of my thoughts or my full reviews on any of them, you can always see those in my Goodreads. I have reviews for all of these books that I'm talking about. All right, so like I said, next up I have books that are kind of broken up by tropes. So if you love fake dating romances, I highly recommend that you read these 4 historical romances with fake relationships. All right, so first up is My Fake Rake by Ava Lee. I love this entire series so much. Her books really work for me and I just really enjoy them. This book in particular has a kind of a fake courting, fake dating setup, where basically here the hero and the heroine are friends. They're kind of like colleagues. They're both academics. They met at a library years ago and they just get along, and they're both very like scholarly, but they're kind of like nerdy as well. And so basically in here the heroine has a crush on this other scholarly guy that she's super interested in, who's kind of popular. So he's back into town and she kind of wants to make an impression on him. And so she decides that she's going to have the hero, her best friend, help her kind of make the other guy jealous and to like notice her, because she's like, oh, if somebody else is like showing interest in me, maybe he will like realize that I'm interesting. And so it kind of goes from there, and it's so fun because in here the hero has been crushing and pining on the heroine for years, and so it's just so adorable seeing their story together, kind of showing that they're like fake courting and into one another, and it's just so cute and so fun. Next up is My Darling Duke by Stacey Reid. Stacey Reid is one of my favorite historical romance authors, and this book in particular is such a good one to start with her books. So this one, basically the heroine is a wallflower and her family is kind of on the brink of financial ruin, and so she's like, I have the perfect plan to save our family's reputation. So she decides to say that she is engaged to this particular duke that she has never met and does not know. So she's basically hoping that since the hero is kind of this like reclusive duke, nobody has seen him for 10 years, nobody ever sees him out and about, he's kind of mysterious, that basically she's hoping, well, maybe I can at least get my sisters married off, get them off to their weddings, and then I can kind of like just go back into my quiet life and nobody will know. It's not a big thing. But instead the hero actually ends up hearing about it and he's super intrigued by it. So he's like, you know what, I'm kind of intrigued. Like, who was this woman who's saying that we are engaged to one another? So he decides to show up and kind of like shake things up with her, and it's just so much fun. This one has disability rep as well. The hero is a wheelchair user, and I just love this romance so much. Highly recommend Stacey Reid's books, but especially My Darling Duke. Next up is The Princess Stakes by Amelie Howard. This is the first book in her Daring Duke series. I love this whole series. I feel like each book in the series has just gotten better and better. There's 4 books in the series and I highly recommend them all, but this one especially for the fake dating aspect. This series especially is so good because it has a lot of diversity, not only on the characters and their representation, but also in the locations as well. Most of the series, I think all of the books actually take place at sea and kind of on different adventures, so we're not in the London ballrooms like most people assume that we are with historical romances, so I love that with this series. So this book, the heroine, her father was Indian and her mother was British, and her father was recently murdered, so she decides she needs to get out of Bombay quickly and hops on to the nearest, quickest ship that's getting out of town. And when she gets onto that ship, she realizes that the captain of the ship is her ex-lover, who is of course the hero. The hero in this one I really like because he is an English duke, but he really is reluctant to kind of go into society and do that. He wants to just be the captain of his ship and kind of do all that, and so he's on his way back to England, and so he kind of proposes this idea of fake dating, fake courting when they get there to kind of help both of them out. Just so good. Like I said, the whole series is just such a standout. All right, and then the last one for fake relationships is This Earl of Mine by Kate Bateman. I love this book so much. Basically in this one, the heroine is a wealthy kind of shipping heiress, and she basically doesn't want to get married. She wants to just run her business, do her own thing, and not have men involved at all. But she's constantly bombarded with men and with fortune hunters trying to get a hold on her hand in marriage. And she also has a cousin who's kind of trying to force her into a marriage as well. So she decides, you know what, I'm going to take this into my own hands. I'm going to go get married and then I'm going to become a widow. And so her plan is to go to this prison, which we see her go to at the beginning of the story. And so she shows up and is basically like, let me marry a condemned criminal who is about to get his life ended tomorrow. I will marry him and then I will become a widow immediately. Like, let's just do this. So she does that and marries like a random stranger in prison and takes off because she's like, you know what, back to my life, back to my business. But then a few weeks later, that husband that she married, who she thought she'd never see again, shows up in a ballroom, which we find out that he was undercover working with the Bow Street Runners, kind of like the police force. And basically they're married and now they have to deal with it. And so they decide, you know what, like maybe we should just like fake date, show people we're like fake courting, and then like lead up to the marriage because we are actually married, and then kind of try to break it off from there. And so it's just so good. Highly recommend this one. It has like such a fun, bonkers like start. So good. All right, and then next up is one of my favorite tropes, which is second chance romances. So if you love second chance, highly recommend you read all of these historical romances. First up is Again the Magic by Lisa Kleypas. So again, here's a gorgeous cover and the beautiful step back for this one. This book is so good, so angsty, so emotional. Will have you hooked within like the first 10 to 15 pages, tear your heart out, and then it kind of goes from there and pieces it back together. This one is a part of her Wallflower series. It's basically the prequel of the series, but I feel like it's standalone on its own as well. This one is a class difference romance as well. So we see the hero and the heroine, they were kind of raised around one another. And so she's the Earl's daughter, and the hero kind of works as like a servant boy for her father's estate. And so they kind of have this like little love moment when they're teenagers. And of course they get ripped apart from one another, and it just breaks your heart as well at the beginning of the story. And then you see years later, the hero ends up rolling back into town, and now he is uber wealthy, rolls back up there and decides he wants to have revenge against the heroine, her family, her father for tearing them apart all those years ago and breaking his heart. And so he wants to now seduce her, break her heart, and leave her behind. And so it's kind of like this revenge plot, very much Persuasion by Jane Austen vibes, basically that like they loved one another in the past, their families ripped them apart, their different standings in society tore them apart, and they were both heartbroken, and now the hero has come up and become a wealthy man, and the hero decides to come back and wreck the heroine now for all of those hurt feelings in the past. And so it goes from there. It's so good, so angsty, highly recommend. All right, another one of my favorite second chance romances is The Notorious Lord Knightley by Lorraine Heath. This book is so good. It was one of my favorites a couple of years ago. I just love it so much. So in this one, we see that the hero and the heroine were actually engaged in the past, and the hero broke the heroine's heart by leaving her at the altar, never showing up. And so basically now it's 5 years later, and somebody has been anonymously writing these kind of like scandal sheets about this notorious Lord Kay and all of his villainous ways, and just kind of like ripping his reputation apart. And so the hero knows it's about him, like it's very obvious. And so he goes to confront the heroine and is like, are you the one writing these things about me? And so it is their romance. It's so good. Lorraine Heath, I feel like she always just gives you a little bit of her blurb, and very much like so much more is going to be happening in the story. It's so good. Love this one to pieces. Highly recommend. Speaking of being left at the altar, another one is Ava Leigh's Rogue's Rules for Seduction. Apparently I just have a thing for that trope. I love it so much. So in this one, we have a second chance romance between the hero and the heroine. This is the third and final book of a series. So in the first book in the series, you see the hero decide to leave the heroine at the altar and not marry her. And so now it is years later, and they're kind of forced together by their friends and family, left on this island together, or it's like a house party on an island. And so they're very much like isolated, a lot of forced proximity, and they kind of have to come to terms with everything that they did to one another in the past, kind of realizing that back then they were not going to be a good match, and that they had so much like growth that they needed to do, and just kind of like their outlooks on life. And the hero never thought he was worthy of the heroine, and it's just, this book is so emotional, so good, so angsty. As you can see, I've like tabbed it up. I have like some favorite moments in this book. I love it so much. Highly recommend it. This is a Rogue's Rules for Seduction by Ava Leigh. All right, and then my last second chance favorite is Nobody's Duke by Scarlett Scott. This book is so good. I love Scarlett Scott's historical romances. She's an indie historical romance author, and I just love so many of her books so much. So this one is a second chance romance between the heroine and the hero. So this one starts off with the heroine. Her husband was actually killed by some dangerous men because of like some political assassination type of things happening. So her life is kind of in danger as well. And so the crown ends up assigning a bodyguard to her, and that ends up being the hero. And so he rolls in, and they had this kind of like moment in the past. I believe he was friends with her brother growing up, so they kind of like knew one another years and years ago, and now he has to like take care of her. There's a lot of dangers and things at stakes, and it's just so good because they have so much to work through from the past. She definitely broke his heart, and there's so much to talk about and overcome in this book, and I just love it so much. It's so good. Highly recommend. All right, and if you love Friends to Lovers, I have 4 to recommend as well, and so let's get into them. First up is A Lady for a Duke by Alexis Hall. This book is so good. This one is definitely longer, and it's very character driven, so not a ton of plot, but I love this book to pieces. It's so emotional and just so good. So in this one, we have a trans heroine, and then the hero is her best friend, and the hero believes that his best friend died years ago in the war, and so the hero is a duke, and he's very much like broody, very much like Beauty and the Beast vibes of him just kind of like alone in his estate and just kind of like falling apart. And so the heroine decides, you know what, maybe I should go to him and be a friend to him through this all. So she decides to do that. So it's kind of like nursing back to health situation, and it's just so good because he doesn't realize who she is at first, and it's just so angsty. It's so good. It's so beautiful. Highly recommend this one. All right, so another Friends to Lovers one is Jewel by Beverly Jenkins. Like I said, I love her historical romances so much. And so in this one, the hero has like really big business aspirations, and so basically an investor comes into town, and the hero's wanting to get his own like newspaper business up and going. So he ends up asking the heroine, who is his friend, to come to this like business dinner with him for the meeting and pretend to be his fake wife, because the investor is like more family friendly family oriented. And so the heroine does that and she's like, yeah, that's fine. Like nobody in town will know. It's not a big thing. But of course, everybody in town ends up seeing them together at the dinner. And at one point, the business investor like gets up and does a toast and is like really loudly talking about the hero and the heroine being husband and wife. And so everybody in town hears, rumors fly the next day, and to save the heroine's reputation, the hero is like, we kind of need to lean into this now. And it kind of goes from there. I really enjoyed this one. All right, another really fun one for Friends to Lovers is Just Like Heaven by Julia Quinn. And this is the first one in her Smythe Smith quartet. And this series is so much fun. This book in particular is my favorite in the series though. So in this one, the hero and the heroine have actually been friends for many, many years. The hero was best friends with the heroine's brother like since childhood. And so he has always been in the heroine's life as well. The hero was kind of taken in by the heroine's entire family since he was best friends with her brother growing up. And so now it's years later and the heroine's brother, he's like out of town for something. And so he asks his best friend, the hero, to look after his sister because she's supposed to be on the marriage mart / husband hunting. And so he's like, can you look after her? So they start spending time together and they kind of both realize their feelings for one another, have attraction to one another around the same time as adults. And so I really love when that happens in Friends of Lovers, where not one has always been like pining the longest or anything like that. Like they both kind of realize at the same time that they have attraction to each other. And it's just so good and so much fun. So many like quirky little moments, really entertaining. Really love this one. All right, and then the last Friends of Lovers one I have is A Rogue to Remember by Emily Sullivan. This one is so stinking swoony. This one just had me smiling so much. I loved this read so much. This one's actually mutual pining where the hero and the heroine have been childhood friends and some things kind of like tore them apart or they're kind of like haven't seen one another in years. So in this one, the hero and the heroine were both kind of orphaned and raised around one another. The heroine was taken in by her uncle and raised by him. And so her and the hero always looked at themselves as like misfits and just kind of like got into little like childhood shenanigans together. And so they had a really close relationship. And then basically like her debut ball, something happens between them and it kind of tears the hero and the heroine apart. And so now it is years later and the heroine actually took off and moved away to Italy and she's living in this like little small town because she was hoping like the reputation of what happened would kind of ruin her and that she could just like live her own life. And so basically her uncle sends the hero, who is now working as an agent for the crown, and he sends him to go and find the heroine and bring her back home. And so it has like that road trip adventure. This one, like I said, it's so swoony and angsty and so sweet. I loved these two together and the mutual pining, like so good. Highly recommend. So next up, if you love Westerns and cowboys, and then I want you to read these historical romances. All right, so first up is Wild Rain by Beverly Jenkins. She has so many amazing Western like historical romances and they're set in America. And this one is one of my favorites. Like I said earlier, she has really strong heroines and the heroine in this one is just one of my favorite characters that she's written. So in this one, the heroine lives in Wyoming and she would just rather kind of tend to her horses and keep to herself. She kind of has more of like a grumpy exterior. And then the hero actually ends up coming to town and he just like can't get enough of the heroine. He wants to be around her all the time. He is in town to interview her brother, who's a doctor, and he has a book as well in the series. And we see how the hero is just so pulled to the heroine. He loves how she wears jeans and she's just so different than other women that he knows. And he's so fascinated by her and just wants to like get in her good graces. It's just so good. Highly recommend this one. Next up is Texas Destiny by Lorraine Heath. So this is one of many of her kind of Western Texas set historical romances. And this is the first in her Texas series. And so this one is so much fun, very angsty. Basically in here, the heroine is a mail order bride and she arrives in Texas to meet her betrothed of who she is supposed to marry. And so when she gets off the train, she sees the man who is there to pick her up. And so she's like, ooh, I'm kind of like drawn to my husband to be. And then she quickly realizes that that's actually not her husband to be. It is her betrothed's brother who is there to pick her up and take her back to their like Texan home. And so it kind of follows their adventure from there. Very much forbidden vibes and a lot of like road tripping along the way to get back to their home. And of course they fall for one another instead. So good. Really enjoy this entire series, honestly. Speaking of mail order brides, we have Tempest by Beverly Jenkins. So I feel like mail order brides and Westerns just go like hand in hand and I just really enjoy them. Beverly Jenkins, along with strong heroines, she also writes the most hilarious and like the best meet cute moments between the characters. This one in particular, the meet cute moment involves the heroine shooting at the hero because she assumes that she is about to get robbed and just like he's in the wrong place at the wrong time. And so it's just so much fun. He is kind of like taken aback by that and is a little worried of having her become his wife, but he still does want a new mom for his daughter. And so it kind of goes from there. It's just so much fun. I love in here how the heroine totally just like shakes up the hero's life and kind of like just throws him for a loop, reworks everything that he thinks he knows about women and like shows him how amazing she is. It's so good. I love her connection with the hero's daughter as well. Just so good. And actually this one and this one, the hero in here and the heroine in this one, they are brothers and sisters. And so just so good to read these two honestly together. All right, so another really fun historical romance if you want like cowboy Western vibes is Engaged to the Gunslinger by Michelle McLean. In this one, the hero is a retired gunslinger, or he was a man for hire for many years, and he just wants like to retire, live in a small town, kind of just be on his own, do his own thing, and he'd be plenty fine with never talking to anybody again. And so he finds this really cute little town. I think the town's actually called like Desolation. So he moves in, and on the first day there, he ends up meeting the heroine, and the heroine is super sassy, super feisty, and she's just like sick and tired of all of these like local kind of like bad guys around town trying to take her land from her. So she sees the hero and she realizes that those like kind of bad guys who are around her are really afraid of the hero because he obviously has a reputation as a gunslinger. So she's like, ooh, this will work out perfectly for me. Why don't I say like I am actually engaged to this guy so that all of these other guys will like stay away from me? And so she does that. And so the hero, hoping to find this like quiet, small town, retired life, ends up finding himself with a fake fiance the first day that he's in town. This one was just like a fun, kind of lighter rom-com style historical romance, which I really enjoyed. I also really liked in here how the characters are actually older. So I think the heroine is like 30, maybe low 30s, and the hero is 40, which I just love seeing older characters represented in romances. So yeah, definitely check out this one. All right, so now if you love dark romances, here are 4 that I recommend that you start with in historical romances. First up is Sea of Ruin by Pam Godwin. I feel like so many people recommend this book, and it is so good, especially if you love dark romances. Even if you don't want to dip your toes into historical romances, I feel like a lot of people read this book just as a dark romance itself, but it is a historical romance, and so it's just so good. Pam Godwin writes really, really dark content, so just know that going in if you need to check like content warnings and things. But yeah, this is her historical romance, and it involves pirates. So good. This one just takes you on a ride. It's high adventure, and it's just so much fun and so like angsty, like you don't know what's gonna happen. I really enjoyed this one. And so basically in here, the heroine is a badass pirate, and she is wanted for piracy, and she actually ends up getting handed over, taken by a pirate hunter, and so it's kind of like this captor-captive situation. It's just so good, so angsty. Like I said, darker, heavier content, so just know that going in, and it'll definitely take you on a ride. Next up is The Highwayman by Kerrigan Byrne. So this is the first book in her Victorian Rebel series. I love this entire series to pieces. I have reread it over the years. It's so good. I highly recommend reading the series in order because there is this huge overarching plot that happens with the characters, but this is the first book in the series and is just so good. This one also has like captor-captive type of vibes, and it's just so good. I can't say too much about this one because I feel like I will give a lot of things away, and I want people to just like jump in and enjoy it because it's just so good. It's also sweepingly romantic and just so like, it's just everything. I really enjoyed this one. Just know that it does have some heavier content warning as well of some of the things that have happened to the characters in this one, but yeah, so good. All right, another one that I feel like is perfect for fans of like dark romances is Duke of Midnight by Elizabeth Hoyt. Here is a really pretty cover for this one, and then we have this gorgeous double page step back as well. This series in particular is the Maiden Lane series, so this is one of the books in the series. I recommend the entire series. It's so good, but this book in particular is one of my favorites in the series. This whole series follows these like kind of like masked vigilantes, so it has the kind of darker side of things going on. This is a Georgian set series as well, so basically it takes place in the like 1740s range in England, and it's just so good. People often refer to this one as like Batman vibes because of the hero and like his tragedy with his parents in the past and kind of him becoming a vigilante now, and it's just so good. The kind of like cat and mouse action between him and the heroine is just, it's just so good. I just love this whole series, so please, please, please read them. I feel like they're perfect if you are familiar already with like darker romances and fine with kind of some of the content warnings in those, because this series does, as it goes on, get really, really dark. I love the series so much. I have a whole guide to Elizabeth Hoyt's historical romances as well if you want more from her. All right, and then the last one I have for this kind of like dark romance theme is The Rakess by Scarlett Peckham. This one isn't like necessarily dark. It does deal with some like heavier, kind of very like melancholy, moody vibes and themes, and so that's why I feel like it'd be perfect if you already like kind of dark romances and kind of that like melancholy, moody atmosphere situation. And this one, as you can tell by the title, it's called The Rakess. And so basically in historical romances, rakes are usually what we always hear, which are the heroes, and they're kind of more like playboys. And instead in this one, the heroine is the one who is very like open with her sexuality, and the one who is more of a rakess is just so good. Like I said, very like heavy content in here, and it's just so good. Like I love this series so much, but this one in particular is still my favorite. All right, so next up, if you love single parent romances, here are 4 that I highly recommend you read. First up, we have Devil's Daughter by Lisa Kleypas. This is one of my favorites from her. I have reread this book multiple times. I love it so much. So here is this beautiful yellow gold cover, and then the yellow step back moment as well. So this one is a single mom romance. The heroine in here, she is a widow and she has 2 young sons. And basically in here, her sons were left at the estate of her late husband. And so it's a lot of farmland, and she kind of wants to help her sons like take care of the land for them. And so she ends up getting the help of the hero, and is just so good. I just love his relationship with the heroine, and especially with her sons as well. So good. Like I said, I've reread it multiple times, so it is super good. highly recommend. And then another single mom romance is To Beguile a Beast by Elizabeth Hoyt. So here is the really pretty cover. And then we have this gorgeous step back moment as well, and that's the pretty cover. So in this one, the heroine's backstory is pretty sad. She was always just looked at as just like this really pretty object, basically. And she was kind of taken in by this wealthy man and just treated as his mistress, like literally his mistress. And she has children by him, and he just like, he doesn't care for her at all or her children. And so she decides, you know what, I'm sick of this life. Like, I'm taking my children and we are leaving. So she ends up rolling up to the hero's house in the middle of the night and asks to be his new housekeeper. And this one in here is so good. Beauty and the Beast vibes. The hero is very just like surly and angry. He has scars, and basically he's like, no thank you. Like, I just want to be left alone. But he ends up letting her in, and her children as well. And the way that they all just kind of like are there for one another. I love his relationship with her children. It's just so, so good. Like, this is one of my favorites as well. I have reread this one as well. So good. All right. And then the next two are single dad romances. So this one is Up All Night with a Good Duke by Amy Rose Bennett. So this one is so much fun. So by day, the heroine is a school teacher, and by night, she is a gothic romance writer. And so basically in here, she ends up meeting the hero. He's a single dad. He's a widower. And so basically he's wanting to find a new wife, or especially a new mom to his teenage daughter, because he's like, I have no idea what to do with her, how to control her. Like, I need help. But he actually has a not so great reputation because people actually believe that he murdered his wife. And so nobody wants to like marry him. And so he's having troubles. And so I'm pretty sure in here, the hero and the heroine, they meet at like a bookstore, I want to say. And so after their meet cute, he's like really drawn to her, and she like has no interest in becoming anybody's wife and getting married. And so that's just like not on her agenda. But of course it kind of changes from there and things happen. And I love in here how the hero's daughter actually reads the heroine's books. And so their conversations are just like so much fun. Really enjoyed this one. It was like such a breath of fresh air. So highly recommend it, especially if you want like a single dad historical romance. So another single dad romance is Vivid from Beverly Jenkins. I love this one. It's one of my favorites from her as well. I have reread this one. It's just so good. So in this one, the heroine is actually a doctor. And so she ends up getting offered a job in Michigan where the hero lives. Basically, the hero's grandfather kind of founded this small town. And so now the hero owns a lot of land. He's the sheriff. He's the mayor. He's like everything in one for the town. And so the town was in need of a new doctor. And he basically let his aunt handle all of the arrangements and kind of the correspondence for that. So when the heroine shows up, the hero is just like under the assumption that she's going to be a man because he thinks that's the only people who can be doctors. And so when she shows up and she's like, no, that's actually me, he is thrown for a loop, and like she definitely sets him straight. And so I love in here just like, again, Beverly Jenkins and the strong heroines. It's just so good. He's a single dad to his daughter, and with the heroine being the new doctor in town, she actually ends up moving in like to the house right behind the hero and his daughter. So she's around them a ton, and it's just so good. The hero is a little bit adamant of getting into a situation or relationship with the heroine because he was married before and his wife left to like go off to the big city. So he has like feelings about like city girls and that they'll never stay. It's just so good. Like I said, again, strong heroine throwing the man for a loop and him like being obsessed with her. This is definitely that. All right, next up, if you love enemies to lovers romances, here are 4 historical romances that you must read. All right, first up is Lord of Scoundrels by Loretta Chase. This is an iconic enemies to lovers historical romance. It is so, so good. This is one of my favorite historical romances, and I just love this one to pieces. And here the hero and the heroine absolutely hate one another, and their banter is so, so good. This is definitely more character driven, and you get to see the growth of the characters over time. Definitely more of an alpha hero, so I love those, but if you don't, maybe not for you, but it's just so good. The hero is definitely a piece of work, but he gets put in his place by the heroine, and I love their relationship so, so much. So good. So many like twists and turns in this one, and I'm just like always down for the ride of their relationship. So good. I feel like this one is just iconic. If you love historical romances, you must read this one. All right, and then next we have The Viscount Who Loved Me by Julia Quinn. So this is the second book in the Bridgerton series. This is the really pretty step back moment. So this is Anthony and Kate's story, which a lot of people will be like, I've already watched Bridgerton, I don't need to read the book. Yes, you do, because the book is totally different than their entire season of their show. It has a way different arc and plot line and just like everything. Like the characters are still there, but they're totally different. And so definitely please read this one because I love it so much. Season 2 of Bridgerton I don't like. I love this book. So in this book, Anthony is the head of the Bridgerton family. Basically, their father passed away when he was like 18-ish. And so he had to become the head of his family and take care of a lot of his younger siblings. And so ever since then, he has had this fear of dying young like his father did. And so he never wanted to leave anybody that he loved behind because he saw how hurt his mother was over the loss of her husband. And so he's like, I will never marry for love, but I know I have to get married to like produce an heir, do all that for the family. And so he decides, you know what, I'll get married to somebody. And so he's like, I just want her to be smart enough to have conversations with me. She can be pretty enough. Like, it's fine. Like, let's just do this. I just can't fall in love with her. So he's actually planning to kind of court the heroine's sister, but instead the hero and the heroine have all these moments together. And so it quickly turns into their romance and relationship. Just such good banter, such a fun one. Like, she truly cannot stand him at first. It's just so good. Like, please go read this book. All right, another really great enemies to lovers one is Heartless Duke by Scarlett Scott. So this author does enemies to lovers so well, and they're like truly enemies. So this one also has like a captor-captive situation. Basically in this one, the hero is like the leader of the secret branch of the Home Office. So he's kind of charged with keeping the peace, and basically he goes to, I think, like his brother's wedding or something like that, shows up at the house, and when he gets there, he ends up meeting the heroine, who is the governess for his nephew. But then we realize that the heroine is actually posing as a governess, and she's really like part of this like Irish underground kind of like rebellion for Irish independence, and she actually ends up trying to kidnap the hero's nephew, and so it becomes this whole thing. And so to kind of take her into hand, he ends up taking her back to his house and kind of holding her prisoner. So he like truly cannot stand her, and it goes from there, and it's just so good. Like I said, this author does enemies to lovers really, really well. All right, and then my last one for enemies to lovers is The Rogue Not Taken by Sarah McLean. So here is this really pretty cover with the gold and then the step back moment as well. This whole series I really enjoy. This is her Scandal and Scoundrels series. So in this one, the heroine, her family, her sisters especially, they don't have a good reputation. So basically one of their sisters trapped an aristocrat into a marriage. So nobody really trusts them, and they're kind of known as the dangerous daughters. And so in here, when the hero and the heroine at first meet, the heroine's trying to like leave town and take off, but he assumes that she's trying to trap him into a marriage situation as well. And it kind of just goes from there. And it is so good because it's true like enemies to lovers. He can't stand her. There's lots of like scandal and gossip and just like forced proximity. There's like some caretaking scenes in here as well. I really enjoyed this one. The banter is just so good between these two. I actually might have to reread it because it's been a few years, and I really, really love this one. All right, so next up I have some recommendations for Marriage of Convenience. So let's get into them. First up is The Beast of Beswick by Amelie Howard, and this is one of my favorites. If you can't tell, I love Beauty and the Beast retellings, and this is another one that fits that bill as well. In this one, the hero is literally super grumpy, stomps around his estate, breaks things, he's scarred, he's just like the worst person to be around. And so in this one, the heroine is determined to save her sister in particular because her sister is kind of being forced into this possible marriage with somebody horrible. And so the heroine is like, you know what, I will go marry somebody instead, and I'm gonna go marry this like awful duke that everybody hates. So she kind of goes to his house and offers herself up to him to save her sister, save her family, and it goes from there. And it's just so good. Like I said, Beauty and the Beast retelling vibes all the way down with this one. All right, next up is In Bed with a Highlander by Maya Banks. This one is so good. Honestly, all of this author's like Highlander romances are so good. So basically these take place in Scotland, and this whole series is so good. I actually started off with reading Maya Banks, were my first historical romances, along with like Lisa Kleypas's Wallflower series. I read both of these. These were my first historical romances, and I still just have like such a fond place in my heart for the series. So basically in this one, the hero is a warrior. He's the leader of his clan, and he's trying to kind of save his family, save his legacy and all of that. And the heroine kind of falls into his hands at the right time, and they realize that she is the illegitimate daughter of the king. And so he kind of wants to like use her possibly for a revenge situation. She's kind of like prized property that would help him as like a pawn in his revenge slash plans and all of that. And so it kind of goes from there. I really enjoy, like I said, this whole series, the Scottish Highland setting is so good. All right, and the next up is When the Earl Met His Match by Stacey Reid. I really love this one. I just read it last year, and it is so good. I love Stacey Reid's historical romances. So this one has a really fun setup where basically the hero is the future earl, and he's kind of lived in his like Scottish estate, kind of like isolated from people. And so he ends up putting an advert in the paper to look for a wife. And so the heroine sees it, and she's just like appalled by the gall of him. And so she ends up writing back to him, like just kind of being sassy and like, how dare you, who would like do this? But they end up becoming like pen pals and just like writing back and forth to one another. And then one of her last letters to him is actually, she gets into a little bit of a scandal and needs some help. And so she actually ends up like kind of proposing a marriage of convenience to him in her last letter. And then she ends up showing up at his doorstep. Like before he could respond, she is there at his place and is offering up this like marriage of convenience. And so when she gets there, she ends up realizing that the hero is actually mute. And so their story goes from there. And it's just so good. Really enjoy this one. Like if you love Marriage of Convenience, so good. Really recommend this one. All right, and then the last one for Marriage of Convenience is The Caribbean Heiress in Paris by Adriana Herrera. This one just feels like a breath of fresh air and is so much fun. I love in here how we have a very business savvy heroine, and it is set in Paris, which again, I love seeing historical set outside of London. So that was fun. The hero in here is Scottish as well, and I just loved the pairing of these two characters. So this one has a really fun premise. So in this one, the heroine, she's arrived to Paris from the Dominican Republic, and she has, I think, like 300 casks of her family's rum, and she's hoping to kind of expand her family's business business. Her family's business has been ran for 3 generations, and her father recently passed away, and she learned to access her trust fund and won't be released until she's married. So that's kind of where it leads into the marriage of convenience. Like I said, the hero is Scottish, he's an earl, and he is just so taken with the heroine from the start, which I love to see. So definitely recommend checking out the series. I really enjoy this author's historical romances. The next book in the series is a sapphic romance, and highly recommend that one. I think I loved it more than this first book, but this one's great for marriage of convenience. All right, so those are all of the historical romance recommendations that I have for you today. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and hopefully you got some new ones to pick up or kind of found a place to start to get into historical romances. Let me know if you want any other like historical romance recommendations. Like I said, this is one of my favorite subgenres of romance to read, and I could just like recommend and talk about historical romances all dang day. So if you want to see me kind of do this video again and maybe do some other tropes, let me know because I would love to. And like I said, if you want to watch any more like historical romance videos, I have a whole playlist. I've linked it in the description of the video, as well as all of the like author guides that I talked about as well. Those are all linked below too. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you have any like historical romances that you'd recommend for people to start with, definitely put them in the comments too so that people can find even more historical romances to love. If you'd rather leave me an emoji in the comments instead today to let me know that you watched this video, leave me a book emoji, like a book stack, any of those things, since we just recommended all the books today. So definitely do that. I've also linked all of the books that I talked about in today's video below as well. So if you need to go back and see any of the ones that I recommended, they're all going to be listed there for you too. So hopefully you enjoyed. If you haven't done so yet, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of my future videos, and I'll see you in my next one.